Well, so dear colleagues, I have the honor and pleasure and whatever kind of pleasant emotions to introduce to you Professor Michael Burke, who is a professor of rhetoric at Utrecht University as in the Netherlands, but at the same time, he is known for his wonderful scholarly papers and books, not only in the sphere of rhetoric, classical, comparative, and whatever, but also in the sphere of what they call in Europe, I would say in Britain, Netherlands, I don't know anything about Germany in this respect, literary linguistics, or what we usually call stylistics. And at the same time, this literary linguistics or stylistics has many aspects, many facets. And Professor Burke is very good at explaining what is cognitive in literary linguistics, and he's extremely good in explaining what is emotive or emotional in literary linguistics. And that's why this short series of lectures has much to do with stylistics, with cognition, and with emotions, and particularly joy, which we all badly need now. So we need joy at any time of life, but at this moment, I think we need it more than anything. Once, I think it was in Iceland, at the conference in Iceland, or some other conference where we met just the last time, we tried to recollect, Michael, when and where we first met, and we failed to do it.
We did, yes. It's that long ago.
It seems that we know just each other, well, all our lives, at least professional, which is great, and which is very, very, very important for, I think, for both of us and for our PhD students and doctoral students and for our academic community. Because I would like to tell you, and this is very, very important at this moment too, that Michael is, he's a true friend of Ukraine. He knows Ukraine, he loves Kyiv, I guess. He visited Kyiv and he's liked here. And there is a very, very vivid proof of it. Very recent proof. When war started, I got a lot of huge number of messages from abroad, from many countries, where our colleagues expressed their support. They asked what we can do and what program we can suggest, etc. And Michael, as you can guess, was one of the first to write me a note. And probably one of the first things he said was, "What can I do for you? What concrete things I can do for you?" And that is the concrete thing Michael suggested, and I hope you will enjoy it, and I hope it will be, we are still in the anticipation of joy, but joy from this lecture is very, very nearby. Michael, you're welcome.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Olga. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today, and especially Olga, Professor Vorobyova, for setting this up. As she's already said, this is going to be the first of a series of lectures under the heading of In Anticipation of Joy, a set of spring-summer lectures that I'm doing for the university, for the National Technical University of Ukraine, so the Igor, Sikorsky, Kyiv Polytechnic Institute, especially for the Faculty of Linguistics, of course, Theory, Practice, and Translation, and also for the Ukrainian Association of Cognitive Linguistics and Poetics. And also I'd like to thank the Ukrainian Fulbright Circle also for being involved. 10 years ago, I had the great fortune to be at the Linguistics University, and now it's very, very good for me to be able to give these lectures. Let me give you some background before I start off. As Olga said, my background is in linguistics and in literature, in rhetoric, especially in rhetorical pedagogy. And lately I've developed an interest in the topic of language, and especially language and humor in children's literacy and children's literature. And what's got me onto that road was a small dip in the levels of literacy in my own country, in the Netherlands. And I was interested in looking into ways how children's literature can help young people to flourish, you know, emotionally and cognitively and socially. So today my talk is part of that growing interest in this particular field. There's not an awful lot of humor in this talk today. I'm working on some other, Arnold Lobel, for example, his Frog and Toad Tales. I don't know if you know that. They're extremely funny. My talk today is based on an article that's just been published. So at the end, the bit of information on the slide, you can check it out if you like. Published with Language and Literature, and the title of that paper is Language in the Gruffalo. Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen with you now, if I can.
I would like the participants to switch off their mics, because just that will make the connection better. Switch off their mic. Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe the videos as well, that could actually improve the connection too. Okay. Can everybody see the slide?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, super. I will begin then. Okay, as I said, the title of my talk today is Language and Style in the Gruffalo. My main research question is the following. Might the language and style choices that have been made by the author, that's a lady called Julia Donaldson, in her book, The Gruffalo, have played a role in the book's success? Now, my methods to try and investigate this particular question rest on a stylistic foregrounding analysis, and that's combined with some theory from both classical rhetoric and from something called orality theory, which you may or may not know about. I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to try these to apply these two to the analysis to try and shed more light on this particular issue. But let me take a step backwards and talk about some general background to this whole story and the author and everything like that, just to position it before we go to the analysis. Excuse me. Okay, the writer, Julia Donaldson, who's here on the right, and the illustrator, Axel Scheffler, he's German and she's British. They've worked together for more than 20 years. And in that time, they produced more than 20 best-selling books. And the number of books that they've actually sold runs into the millions, to be honest. Here's a little indication as to some of the books that they have written together and illustrated. So this study just focuses on the one iconic book, The Gruffalo, which was written or published in 1999. Now, Donaldson has, in her own right, been a highly successful children's author over the past 25 years. She's published more than 100 books, and many of her books have been translated from English into other languages. I learned before the talk began that it's been translated into Ukrainian as well, which doesn't surprise me. Donaldson has also written many educational books, and these have especially been about phonics, so how to pronounce words in English. As you know, English spelling is a little bit precarious and chaotic, and phonics helps young children to pronounce words properly. The Gruffalo is a short children's story of approximately 700 words. If I have time at the end, I will read it to you. It's been reported that Donaldson took 2 years to write this book, And this led one critical voice to say that that's something like 10 words a week. I don't think that was a very kind comment, actually. I don't think it was meant kindly either. The work is essentially a short tale about a clever mouse who meets and outwits a terrifying bully of a Gruffalo. The Gruffalo, however, is not simply a creature in the real world of the story. It's been kind of inadvertently conjured up from the mouse's own vivid imagination. This makes it quite a complex plot. One could say that it's a made-up monster that turns out to be real. So the story is about this clever little mouse and a monster. When the mouse goes for a walk in a dangerous forest, he invents this fantastic creature called the Gruffalo, and he does this in order to scare off real enemies. And these are a fox, an owl, and a snake. But he's very, very shocked when he meets the real Gruffalo. And using his wits and his intelligence, and use the Gruffalo to scare off his three enemies, the fox, the owl, and the snake, and then to scare off the Gruffalo itself. So the mouse is described in the inside cover of the book as quick thinking. Indeed, the mouse is clever, intelligent, and quick-witted, but he's also very cognitively nimble. And it's this kind of cerebral flexibility that makes him very, very resilient. The mouse is also a trickster. And as you know, a trickster is this archetypal character who can cross social and physical boundaries. And he inhabits this kind of liminal space where this character is neither wholly good nor wholly bad. And tricksters are found in mythologies and folk tales and fictions around the world. So they're collectively recognizable. There's, for example, there is, Hermes from Greek mythology. I suppose also Odysseus, even though he's not a god, from Greek mythology. Loki from Norse mythology. Anansi, which is the spider from West African culture. These things, these trickster figures appear all over the place. Now, I want to talk a little about reading aloud as opposed to reading, because that's a different kind of thing that I'm not usually dealing with. So I want to spend a bit of time on that. When we are conducting reader status analysis, we're primarily concerned with reading and how readers process language and language patterns, i.e. words and sentences, and these can either be on the page or on the screen. Now, stylistically analyzing a book, like the Gruffalo, which is a picture book, is a much broader exercise. This is the case because the core target audience of the Gruffalo consists of children who have yet to learn how to read. Now, even though children may read this book themselves once they've kind of turned 5, and my kid that they started to read it themselves when they were 6. It's a book that's primarily meant to be read aloud to preschoolers, as most picture books arguably are. And this means that many of these reading events, the main processing mode is kind of acoustic, involving the listening ear rather than the kind of text scanning eye. Vision is, of course, still also required, as we've seen in regular reading aloud to children situations. The pictures are also shown to the child or the children by a parent or a teacher as this oral recital progresses. And you can see the two teachers on the screen. They're also showing the images to the children. And with the exception of a few multimodal novels for grown-ups, playfully combine text and image representations, the domain of the image and the picture book world is firmly in the realm of the child. Of course, you have things like comic books and strips, but that's another genre. Maria Nikolaeva and Scott wrote together called How Picture Books Work. And they've observed that such picture books have this dual level of communication, the visual and the verbal. Now, much has been written on what picture books are and what they do. Indeed, the theory behind children's picture books is really deep and really broad, and I can in no way do it any justice in this talk here today. What I will do, therefore, is attempt to construct what type of picture book I think the Gruffalo is by drawing some of these existing theories and frameworks. So, the Gruffalo, I would argue, is a picture book wherein the language and the images are not quite on an equal footing when it comes to importance. The language, I argue, is primarily primary. However, it's also not the case that the Gruffalo is merely an illustrated book and the text can exist to its fullest potential without the images. The Gruffalo, therefore, falls somewhere in between these two poles. The story can be recited in a performance setting, and owing to the rhythm and the rhyme, an awful lot can be gotten out of it by its audience. However, the graphics, and especially the depiction of the Gruffalo itself, have, over the years, become iconic. And effective marketing and live performances and vast quantities of merchandising have, of course, played a key role in this. You can see the merchandising here on the left-hand side. There's so much of it. It's unbelievable. And because of this, because of the merchandising, because of the image of the Gruffalo, you can say that in the past 20 years, the image of the Gruffalo has come to represent the story itself. So let's talk about the mutual benefits of reading aloud to your children. This is something we have to touch on yet. Why do caregivers have young children? What effects might these have on the child's development? Claire Squires wrote an article on marketing in children's literature, and she makes the observation that picture books commonly speak to a double audience, keeping the adult reader entertained alongside the child. And a similar observation was made by Nikolaeva and Scott when they described this dual audience of child. Now, the benefits of reading aloud to children are manifold, and they can be generally predicted. For example, it helps a child to develop its language skills. It has creativity and imagination. It should also enhance a child's levels of concentration while he or she sits and listens to the story. And moreover, reading a range of books should teach a young child about different topics, and that reading together, one might hope, might encourage this kind of thirst for knowledge, as well as creating a strong bond between the child and the parent, or the child and the teacher or caregiver. Now, academic research, I want to move now to a kind of critical approach to the Gruffalo to give it some kind of background. There's been very little academic research on the Gruffalo. Not many people do children's literature. And there's been no real linguistic or stylistic analysis of the story. But there have been lots of commentaries in the British newspapers, especially in the quality newspapers, the broadsheets, and in other periodicals over the years about Julia Donaldson herself as a writer. Now, many of these have been generally positive. They've had this positive tone. However, there have been some dissenting voices. For example, the writer and journalist Tom Hodgkinson, who was writing for the British newspaper The Telegraph in 2015, years ago, has been critical of the style in the Gruffalo. And he makes a number of claims, and these include the following, and they're in front of you on this slide. He says, it doesn't scan, the rhyming couplets have got no set rhythm, the story is limited, and with regard to words usage, Hodgson notes that the word good is used incorrectly, and it's also used too broadly. Hodgkinson is also critical of Donaldson only being able to find one adjective to describe fearful Gruffalo, namely the word terrible. He also suggests that the secret of the book's success must lie in, I quote here, its bland and unassuming nature. So the gist of this invective, one must conclude, is that the Gruffalo is a pretty dreadful story, and that Julia Donaldson, the writer, is at best a kind of mediocre writing of children's literature. Now, if we reflect on my earlier research question for this talk, namely to what extent has the language, rhetoric, and style of the Gruffalo played a part in its success, then if we base our judgment on this review by Hodgkinson, or one like it, then we can probably conclude that the answer is very little indeed. But is this a fair assessment? And perhaps more importantly, is it correct? I think a deeper analysis of some of the linguistic and stylistic features in the book, The Gruffalo, should help to shed more light on this matter. And this is what we're going to do now. Look at the story in more stylistic depth and detail. Now, as a parent, I read this story to my own children at bedtime, probably hundreds of times, when they were 3, 4, 5-year-old. I did my wife. It's unlikely that we're unique in this. In fact, I was chatting with somebody, Diana, who's in the session today, and she read it to her own children in Ukraine. Now, I did this until I reached a stage by which I no longer really needed to physically look at the words, the text on the page. I'd somehow memorized the text without really trying to. My intuition as a past declaimer of the Gruffalo is that what's prominent about this story is, stylistically speaking, is on the one hand, the rhyme, the rhythm meter, and on the other hand, the extensive lexical repetition. Indeed, one might argue that had it not been for these linguistic phenomena, I would probably not have been able to memorize and recite the text so effortlessly. Let's therefore look at this, start this investigation by looking more closely at these two particular stylistic features. So on the one hand, the rhythm and the meter, and on the other hand, the lexical repetition. Let's first, though, start by looking at the title. You know, every captivating book needs a good title. Now, the stuff of foregrounding, which is an important tool in stylistic analysis, and it's been developed by the formalists, the Czech structuralists in the early 20th century, and it drew, of course, on the schools of rhetoric from 2,000 years ago. Foregrounding rests on the concepts of parallelism and repetition, and sometimes the strategic deviation from those two phenomena of rhythm and parallelism in order to kind of bring to light hidden parts of the message. A first step when we're analyzing this story is to look more closely at the title, The Gruffalo. And let's have a look at its phonetic patterns. Now, it's a proper noun. The sound symbolism, or sometimes called linguistic iconicity, is quite strong, I think. We have this grrr for Gruffalo. It's a common 2-letter consonant cluster, and it appears often in English at word onset. The sound symbolism is almost imitative in nature. Now, Sadowski, who is a historical linguist, he argues that these grrr words in English constantly refer to negative aspects of experience and existence. And for this observation, he draws on Marjorie Bolton, who was a very famous poetic and linguistic critique in the 1970s and 1980s. And she says that stops in phonetics and affricates, which of course are included in the grr sound. And she says the following, she says, these suggest harshness, violence, cruelty, movement, discomfort, noise, and conflict. And as Sadowski further observes, many of these grr words in English have a kind of Anglo-Saxon origin. And some verb forms that employ this consonant cluster include the following words: to growl, to groan, to grouch, to grudge, to grimace, to grapple, to grumble, to grate, and to grind. And these last two examples, grating and grinding, might call to mind the imagery of, crushing and biting and chewing and ultimately of devouring. So if you take all that into consideration, the word Gruffalo appears to be quite a fitting choice made by the author Donaldson for the book's title to represent this monstrous character. Let's have a look at the meter, the rhyme, and the rhythm. Foregrounding really does abound in this story. You'll notice that when I read it a bit later, on various levels. And while reading, one can really feel the rhythm of the story, so much so that it becomes nigh impossible to kind of misread the text. There is, it feels like, some kind of invisible template at work, some kind of embodied or somatic level that keeps a person reading on and keeps that person on track. However, not everybody would agree with this. You may recall that the critic Hodgkinson was disapproving of the meter and the rhythm. He said, it's got no set rhythm, it doesn't scan, and the meter's all over the place. Does the stylistic linguistic evidence actually support his claim? Well, let's see. The text is written in rhyming couplets. The story opens and mostly continues in dactylic tetrameter, which has been referred to as quite a rare meter. It consists of a stressed syllable followed by two unstressed ones, kind of a beat and two off beats, also known as a falling meter. Da, 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 da. Let's listen to some examples. This is how the story starts. A mouse took a stroll through a deep, dark wood. A fox saw the mouse, and the mouse looked good. So these two opening lines, it is dactylic. It's slightly delayed. It's more like a trimeter than a tetrameter, more like 3 feet rather than 4 feet. But after these two, it really moves into the full 4 feet. So it continues as follows. Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come and have tea in my underground house. It's terribly kind of you, fox, but no, I'm going to have lunch with a Gruffalo. And this continues throughout the main sections of the verse part of the story. Now, it's carefully crafted, playful rhyming lyrics delivered in this tight metrical form, like the ones found in the Gruffalo. These kind of stay in our heads somehow, and indeed in the heads and the auditory memories of our children whom we read to. In his 2012 book on Shakespeare's sonnets, entitled Why Lyrics Last, Brian Boyd looks at the question of what pleasures can verse offer aside from narrative. And he especially focuses on the patterns of sounds and senses of language. And he concludes that we have a unique human motivation to play with examples of words that rhyme with each other at the end of lines. There is wood, good, mouse, house, claws, jaws, fox, rocks, sped, said, toes, nose, black, back, snake, lake, stream, cream, and to-woo, flew. And many of these, like, jaws, claws, and house, mouse, are quite predictable, whereas others, such as to-woo, flew, are less so. To-woo is supposed to be the sound that an owl makes in English. It's not very accurate, to be honest, but people still say to-woo, but it does rhyme with flew. Now, Donaldson has spoken in the past about how she was inspired to write the story after having read a Chinese folktale about a tiger. In that story, I once read it, the mouse is a fox who's being hunted by the tiger. Now, the word tiger is arguably not an easy word to rhyme with in English. So Donaldson probably had to come up with something else, something unique. Now, the word Gruffalo also doesn't rhyme with much, perhaps except the word buffalo, but then it kind of ends. But it does rhyme with the phrase, doesn't he know? Gruffalo, doesn't he know? And this phrase, doesn't he know, is a seminal phrase in the story. It kind of drives the plot forward. And it occurs no less than 6 times, placed strategically in the text. And here's an example. Silly old owl, doesn't he know there's no such thing as a Gruffalo? So did the title of the book come about because of some kind of skilled linguistic reverse engineering by the author that started from a key line that was central to driving the plot forward? Well, it's not impossible. This piece also abounds in very, very playful alliteration from the sibilant consonants of a scrambled snake to the plosive menace of deep, dark woods. The story is also laden with concrete nouns, from mouse and fox and snake to house and rocks and lake, and eyes and teeth and toes to warts and knees and nose. Abstract nouns are very, very thin on the ground in this particular story. And much of the word choice may be predictable, but there are a number of strategically placed exceptions. The words used to describe the animals in a kind of potential food form are very witty, and they're presented in kind of humanized cuisine terminology. And it's here on your screen. They also alternate in patterns from cooking process to cooking product. So the first 3 also share a basic meter. Excuse me. Roasted fox, owl ice cream, scrambled snake. And this pattern is then broken by the 4th amusing culinary item, Gruffalo crumble, which is not only foregrounded, but the juxtaposition of the monster and the pastry dish is in some ways oxymoronic.
Sorry, dear colleagues, could you switch off your phones, mics?
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. In my article, I refer to this. I say it's like Godzilla meets the Great British Bake Off, which is a cookery program on the BBC. Now, let's have a look at the importance of lexical repetition. There's also a relevant extra dimension here. The rhetoricians of the classical world knew that when it came to memorizing language for later recital by heart, one had to develop and deploy kind of very absurdly vivid image combinations. And the more intense these combinations, the better. You then had to place them strategically in locations in your so-called memory palace. And the vivacity and the absurdity of these compounded linguistic phrases are examples previously like owl ice cream and Gruffalo crumble. And these are not depicted pictorially in the book at all. These combinations should remain memorable for young listeners and readers, in that their auditory representation in the book really does meet the demands of classical rhetorical principle on this memory device. Moving more centrally to lexical repetition, we saw earlier how the critic Hodgkinson was extremely critical of the language choices in the story. He especially didn't like the fact that Donaldson had used the word terrible as an adjective to describe the Gruffalo. And here's an example. You can see it on the screen as well. He has terrible tusks and terrible claws and terrible teeth in his terrible jaws. Young listeners will be drawn to the playfulness of this trisyllabic word being repeated in this kind of alveolar plosive onset and this rhotic liquid nucleus of the word and its bilabial plosive ending, its coda. And for some younger children with their bountiful imaginations, the regular plosive sounds on the first syllable may even project the pounding footsteps of the monster moving methodically through the wood. It's also dactylic, like the Gruffalo, terrible Gruffalo. So terrible tusk, terrible claws, terrible teeth, terrible jaws. You can see, almost hear the thing, lumbering through the forest. It may also be recalled that the critic Hodgkinson was also very dissatisfied with the word good in the Gruffalo. He said it's employed incorrectly, and there are far better and more appropriate words that can be used, more suitable. Now, I've had a look at good, and it does occur on 8 occasions, but when it occurs, it's used to rhyme with the word good. The word would. So this good-would combination works in quite an engaging way when it's in the rhyme, especially for the audience, the preschool listeners. And I think it's rather than be distracting and discordant, I think it's rather pleasant for those particular. There's 29 times in the actual story. That's about 4% of the total word count. And in addition, mouse is mentioned 26 times. Now, lexical repetition at this level, if one wanted to see it that way, could be seen as redundant and could be seen as being poor style. But imagine that we were not to look at the text purely as a children's story, but also as a kind of children's poem or song or rhetorical declamation or an oral performance, or indeed maybe a blend of all these into one enactment. Would that so-called dispensable repetition not then become indispensable and necessary and purposeful? Now, I could say much, much more about the language and the narrative and the rhetoric and the style in the Gruffalo, and I do so in my article, which I'll refer to at the end if you want to. But I now need to turn to the discussion part of this talk to explore what all this might mean and where it might lead to. And also, I will consider these stylistic observations that I've just made anew through the principles and practices from both the field of orality theory and from the domain of classical rhetoric. I've already started to touch on classical rhetoric, haven't I, when I mentioned the memory. So, the discussion. Let's begin by taking a step backwards or more sideways. If we're to reflect on how we teach and our teaching practices, we say that when we're teaching grammar and writing and style, repetition is almost something that's redundant, and we encourage our students to get rid of it, don't we? It has to be eliminated. But that's when we're teaching grammar. When we're teaching rhetoric, you could say that repetition is encouraged. It's valued, it's treasured even. Think of the style figures and all the repetition that goes on there. Now, rhetorical manifestations of oral and written culture abound with rhetorical repetition. And it's even more so in children's literature, and especially in children's poetry. So these aren't grammar style errors or style errors, as some critics have said. You could say that every act of repetition is important. It could be because it could be the bearing of subtle differentiations of pleasurable meaning. Now, there's a children's writer called Debbie Pullinger, and in her 2017 book, she writes the following, and I quote, she says, in children's poetry, repetition is never simply repetition. So, in the bigger picture, this strategically structured repetition helps orators and performers alike to stay on track, as it were. It also creates regular spaces in the production of discourse where little cognitive effort needs to be placed on the ongoing oral creation. Instead, the cognitive effort can be rerouted to the process of recall when you're trying to think about the lines that are coming up next. And once the repetition, once this repetition section, the chorus has ended, you could then start the lines. In a classical rhetorical sense, such spaces can be seen as a moment in the discourse that allows listeners to cognitively engage with what's being said or sung before. And this engagement can be critical and creative, and you can even, hearers can even mentally recast what you're saying. Indeed, if we look at this first book, the Rhetorica ad Herennium, thought to have been written by Cicero, we now know that it wasn't written by Cicero. That's why it still says Cicero, but it's in brackets. The author of this book, written in the 1st century BC, so more than 2,000 years ago, advises giving as much time to pauses as to exclamation, so actually as to the pronunciation of the words. In addition to the rhetorical greats of classical antiquity noting this, similar observations about how to deliver it this way have also been seen in modern orality theory, especially authors like Walter Ong. I don't know if you're aware of his work or familiar with his work, and also people like Collins. So, rhythmic repetition can be found in numerous aspects of poetry, including meter, alliteration, consonance, assonance, excuse me. As Derek Attridge has said, and he's a leader in the field of poetic rhythm. One of his books is here on the screen. Attridge has said, and I quote, "Rhythm is critical to the enjoyment of poetry." He refers to it as the engine that drives spoken language forward. It just enjoy listeners to respond and participate in its rhythm. Excuse me. The rhythm also creates a sense of movement and emotion. Excuse me. Debbie Pullinger poses the telling question, why is it that children's poets use so much repetition? She suggests that the dynamics of oral mentality have a significant influence on children's poetry, and that lyric written for children might be seen as a site of interaction between orality on the one hand and literacy on the other hand. So, in view of all this, yes, the Gruffalo is loaded with repetition, as was earlier noted by the critics, but arguably none of that repetition is as redundant as it might initially appear. Indeed, given the age of the largest part of the audience, these are preschoolers aged 4 and 5, and given their theory of mind, one could say that the repetition in the Gruffalo is absolutely essential. It can also be argued that Julia Donaldson meets the strategic criteria of oral composition set out by Debbie Pullinger in her book. This is on your slide now. She draws on the work of both Walter Ong and Foley, and basically these compositions should fulfill these 5 requirements, and these are: it should be generally formulaic, that is, it should repeat elements and have applicable recurrent scenes. It should be additive in structure, that is, simple cumulative relationships expressed with simple grammar and simple syntax. It should be full of repetition and copiousness. For example, using backlooping, using natural empathic speech patterns. It should be situational, that is, in contexts that are never abstract, but always embedded in recognizable experiences. And the Gruffalo set in a forest. And finally, it should be antagonistic. There should be a polarized world of good and evil. And you have that with the mouse who's good and with the Gruffalo who's evil. Taking all this into consideration, the book, the Gruffalo, it meets all 5 of these criteria fully. So, if we were to reconsider the book, we'll see that the story of the Gruffalo is a tale that is full of music. Of that, there can be little doubt. So maybe the Gruffalo isn't a story in the traditional narrative sense after all. Maybe it does not primarily belong to the category of children's fiction. Maybe it's not primarily belonging to any of written genres. Maybe it's a poem, or a song, or a ballad, or a folk rhyme, or a narrative to be, declaimed and recited and performed. and not just a literary discourse in the typical literary discourse processing sense. In line with this proposal, imagine if we were to consider the Gruffalo afresh as a children's song rather than, strictly speaking, a children's story. Where does that then leave the author, Julia Donaldson? Well, it turns out, if we had the chance to ask her, she might actually agree. It seems that as a young woman, she acted and sang and danced, and she started her professional career writing songs and busking with her husband. And furthermore, her first children's book, which was called A Squash and a Squeeze, and this was published in 1993, so 6 years before the Gruffalo, it started out as a song that she wrote together with her husband. And here's an image of Julia Donaldson and her husband, who's called Malcolm, busking together. On the right, busking when they were young, back in it looks like the 1960s, in a London train station. And here on the left, here they are busking today. They're both in their mid-70s. Now, if we combine this new musical knowledge with Donald's earlier mentioned love of phonics, remember she wrote lots of books on phonics about sounds, we might realize the importance of the oral sounds over the written words for this particular author. And as a result, we might recast Donaldson not exclusively as a teller of tales, because that she most certainly is, but just as importantly as that, maybe as a singer of songs. Critical reviewers that call into question the style and language use of Donaldson might stop and consider that her overuse of lexical repetition, rhyme, rhythm, and meter seamlessly matches with the cognitive, the social, and the emotional requirements of her main preschooler audience. It's a central principle of classical rhetoric that was put forward by Aristotle and Cicero and Quintilian, that an orator must know the nature, desires, and makeup of his or her audience in order to be able to effectively move and delight them. For all the perceived redundancy in her language use, her rhyme, and her rhythm, Donaldson is faultlessly attuned to the needs of her main audience. Okay, it's time for me to conclude. The question that this talk sought to address was, to what extent have the language and style of the Gruffalo played a part in the huge success that the book has enjoyed? Remember, it sold millions and millions of copies. The analytic proofs that have been furnished in this foregoing analysis by me have hopefully served to show that the role of language has not been insignificant. Of course, we always have to show kind of restraint when we make causal arguments, as causality invariably entails a lot of complexity and correlations may have alternative explanations. However, I've sought to work towards a most likely explanation. The case remains open, but proofs have been tabled for the case of the importance of language in the success of the popular children's story, or should I say, even children's song, The Gruffalo. And with that, my talk is ended. On this next slide, you can see, if you'd like to read the full article, and like I say, the actual analysis is much, much deeper than what I've been able to do here. It's an 8,000 word article. You can find it here. And if you're struggling, if your university doesn't have access to this, I can send a copy to Olga and she can distribute it to everybody. Something I'd just like to touch on, here are some key references. As I was saying, The Mouse and the Gruffalo is about this very brave, quick-witted mouse who's confronted by this evil, destructive Gruffalo character. And as a kind of inspiration, an illustrator who is in the Zoom room today, Irina Gorshar, maybe you can introduce yourself in a moment. She came up with this hybrid of a bear and a monster, and a very, very brave little mouse. I'll allow your imaginations to work out who that might be. And do remember, the mouse wins at the end. There is joy at the end of the tale, but he has to work hard and has to use his intelligence to get there. And his oratory, as a certain president not too far away from you is also doing to great effect. Thank you. Are there any questions? I'm going to stop my share now so I can come back into the room and then we can have questions.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And well, I have a question already, a philosophical one, a cognitive philosophical, but I will keep it to myself first because I would like people to ask questions and you can ask them without raising your hands, just switch on your mics. It would be easier. Or you can write your questions into the chat. So you're welcome.
Yeah, just switch on your mics and jump in.
Yeah.
I see
the Artur Grantovich, our Professor Goodmanian, raised his hand. Artur Grantovich, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, Mike, for your interesting lecture. And my question is not so philosophical as probably Professor Rogova mentioned. Well, yes, but I, as frankly speaking, I didn't quite well understand this story. The Gruffalo, and if we all know that probably our children, they with instinct love books and stories, and they are introduced to wonderful ideas, places, creatures they haven't been encountered, and through stories, children are able to learn more about life, the world, and themselves.
Absolutely.
And aside from creating a bonding opportunity, there are so many benefits to reading with your child. And in one of your slides, you mentioned some benefits. As far as I understand, the most common benefits are probably cultural understanding, communication, yes, curiosity, imagination. And what are the specific peculiar benefits that you mentioned? Would it be so kind as to dwell it once again? Thank you very much.
Well, I mentioned, didn't I? I mentioned the creativity and the communicative aspect and imagination, of course. Children let their imaginations run wild, but also they're attentive. I mean, in today's society where children, and not at that age, have less and less and less attention span, smaller and shorter. If they're listening to you reading aloud, you know, they're paying attention. It also gives them a thirst for knowledge. What I still do, I still read aloud to my children. Now they are 8 and 11. But every now and then they still love me to read aloud, and they sit there and we read things I've read before to them, like The Wind and the Willows, you know, but they still love that, and that attention is very good. And I think curiosity as well. So it has so many benefits. And also the connection between the caregiver. It could be a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a mother, a father, an older sister, an older brother, a teacher. You know, the connection, the bonds are really brought together. So the huge benefits. And I wish that that they used to train teachers at primary school how to read aloud. You know, it's an art. Reading aloud is an art. And they've stopped doing that now. So I hope they bring that back, because I think that's a very important aspect.
Yes. So as mentioned, phonology is important to maintain the child's attention.
Absolutely,
yes?
absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
I would like, before other questions come, I would like to introduce Irina Gorshar, if Michael you don't want, who is our illustrator. She drew that last slide associated with our current situation. Irina, are you here? Can you switch on your camera? Ira.
Good afternoon. I can switch my microphone, but I cannot switch my camera due to poor connection.
Oh, that's okay.
But she does exist. Well,
Yeah.
is here.
Irina, I must say, I thought it was very clever how you managed to incorporate some of the aspects of the Gruffalo, like the prickles on his back, into the bear. It was a really nice blend, as well as the horns, of course.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I enjoyed your perspective as well, because of course you have the mouse standing up, saying stop, and you're behind the mouse to one side. It was a very good choice of perspective as well as a wonderful drawing. You're very, very talented.
Thank you very much.
Hello, can anybody hear me? Hello, can anybody hear me?
Evgeny Kazantsev, I don't know whether he can switch on his camera. You're welcome, of course.
I have tried to switch it a number of times, but what I see is I don't see myself, but you can hear me.
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, excellent, very good. So what I would like to say, and I cannot but say that I'm really practically amazed with what you have said, but from a slightly different angle. I would rather not be very much interested, frankly speaking, in what the intestines are called in an operation, but I would rather be interested if the patient is alive thereafter. So the aftermaths of the entire thing. Because I was involved a number of times in translating books from Ukrainian into English, the fairy tales for the children, I'm always faced with the problem of what you can allow yourself when you translate into a different language. Whether this is tautology, whether the grammar is incorrect or something, we know much about theoretical grammar. Some of us do very well in practical grammar, but still there is this very big question when you have translated and you begin to read and reread what you have done, where is the criterion, the benchmark, whether you can go along these lines and whether you can allow yourself. What you've been saying, I would wish to see that in a concise form, given that it is such a popular book. The circulation goes to millions and millions, and it is repeatedly catching the interest of the children. And that means everything that you said it theoretically, nicely, perfectly, but from the practical point of view, this is what is working for them, for the younger minds. Therefore, when I translate, when I have my next assignment, I would definitely go, and I will not be stopped by thinking that, oh, Eugene, this is a stupid thing. You don't have to do that because this is so-and-so, because Olga Petrovna was always saying, this is no good English and you should correct it and do something about it. Okay, so
the only thing is that I have nothing to do with it.
So the biggest value for me in what you've been saying, I would wish to go through that once again and then summarize it and draw the conclusions for myself, how far Eugene can go in terms in translation. So I have no question, except for I would wish to see this material in my computer. And thank you very much.
You make an excellent point. Translate. I mean, I know quite a few translators. I'm not a translator myself, although I'm fluent in Dutch and German, but I don't translate. Any translation is in itself an act of creativity, but translating a poem like this or a story like this, which rhymes, is a real challenge, I think, for translators. I mean, I've read the Dutch one and the German one, and they are completely different. They need to maintain the rhyme. They need to maintain the meter. And in a way, these are wonderful creations. You can almost argue that the translators of the Gruffalo are recreating the work themselves, because they are hugely popular, so they work. And yet they're, the translators put in so much work to meet the meter and to meet the extensive phonetic parameters and the rhyme. So these translators must be almost, you know, superhuman, really top creative artists.
And one last thing, just very quickly, not to distract the others, an avalanche of questions from the others. You see, the understanding of rhyme with the Russian and Ukrainians is so much different from what you have in the Western world.
Of course.
We do not even consider this to be a poem unless it is rhymed. So something, the samples from your poetry really sometimes are very difficult to be accepted by us as poetry. You have to go into the meaning. And then out of the meaning, you understand, oh, this is something huge and superb. But for us, there definitely has to be a rhyme in order to call it poetry.
Wow.
In this case, I should say, probably not the first time, but amongst the very few examples where rhyme is inherent, it is all the time there. And it is like you know, like, I don't know, like balm on the wounds to hear that and to know that this is poetry and this is given to the children and they appreciate that. Thank you again so very much for it.
You're welcome. Thank you for your points. They were very good.
I think I would like to, just the time for me to come in with my practical, didactic, cognitive, philosophical question. Because, well, the thing is that we are discussing the idea of rhyming, repetitions, etc., and its connection, its appeal to the public. I mean, to the audience, young audience here in this case. Well, I guess there is another key word that comes in both in the original and in the feasible translations. That is not the idea of rhyming or repetitions, but the idea of patterning. It's a pattern which matters, whatever pattern it is. I'm not sure whether Julia Donaldson knew anything about neurobiology or cognitive linguistics, I doubt that. But she was a born neurobiologist in terms of what we do and how we form, shape, not just the mind, but the work of the brain and how we train it later. For what I know, and that might explain the appeal to the young audience and then they lose interest to it, is that the book is built in such a way that it is naturally designed to shape the brain. I mean, according to that neurobiological assumption that our mind searches for newness, for novelty, but every time it wants to put that novelty or to adapt it into some kind of pattern, and then it relaxes, then it needs some triggering and relaxation. Well, I think that the idea is in that patterning, which is extremely important for that critical period when the brain is being formed.
I think you make some very, very interesting and correct, accurate points there, Olga. I mean, if you look at just, you know, very basic nursery rhymes, I don't know what it's like in Ukrainian, but in English, they're all about patterning, and the more simplistic the rhyme, the better. And, you know, I'm sure that kind of meets the child's embodied need for pattern recognition at a non-conscious level. Yes. I think so.
We can call her a born neurobiologist.
Yes, I'd also like to call her. I'd also like to call her a born rhetorician. She's a wonderful rhetorician as well. And what's interesting about this story, even though the language seems so simple and the pattern seems so simple, the plot is actually it is simple on the one hand. It's a journey into a forest, a journey out of a forest, but what happens is quite revolutionary, because the mouse thinks up the Gruffalo to scare off these real creatures, and then all of a sudden the Gruffalo appears in the story. You know, comes out of the mouse's mind, as it were.
It's a product of the mouse's imagination.
But it's
which is
very, very
evil.
real.
Which
it's
is
very
evil.
yeah, which is evil. It's there, it's real. It wants to kill the mouse, and the mouse uses it to frighten off the other predators, but then also has to face the mouse, face the Gruffalo, and threaten to eat it.
So it means that we ourselves create the evil, which later we face as the evil, and we have to either to surrender to it or to overcome it.
Yes, it seems
But this
quite...
is our creation.
Yes.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
That's terrible. Here the word terrible comes into.
Are there any more questions? Yeah. If not, I could read the story to you if you like.
Maybe there will be other questions after.
That? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
here we
that
go.
will be great.
I'm going to read the, if you have young children, and I advise you to get the Ukrainian version and to read the Gruffalo to them. I can't show you the pictures, but it's the same pictures as the ones you saw on the... Okay, here we go. There are only 700 words, so it won't take long.
Yeah.
A mouse took a stroll through the deep, dark wood. A fox saw the mouse, and the mouse looked good. Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come and have lunch in my underground house. Oh, it's terribly kind of you, fox, but no. I'm going to have lunch with a Gruffalo. A Gruffalo? What's a Gruffalo? A Gruffalo? Why, didn't you know? He has terrible tusks and terrible claws and terrible teeth in his terrible jaws. Where are you meeting him? Oh, here, by these rocks. Oh, and his favorite food is roasted fox. Roasted fox? I'm off, fox said. Goodbye, little mouse. And away he sped. Silly old fox. Doesn't he know there's no such thing as a Gruffalo? On went the mouse through the deep, dark wood. An owl saw the mouse, and the mouse looked good. Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come and have tea in my treetop house. Oh, it's frightfully nice of you, owl, but no, I'm going to have tea with a Gruffalo. A Gruffalo? What's a Gruffalo? A Gruffalo? Why, didn't you know? He has knobbly knees and turned out toes and a poisonous wart at the end of his nose. Where are you meeting him? Oh, here by this stream. And his favorite food is owl ice cream. Owl ice cream? To wit, to woo. Goodbye, little mouse. And away owl flew. Silly old owl. Doesn't he know there's no such thing as a Gruffalo? On went the mouse through the deep, dark wood. A snake saw the mouse, and the mouse looked good. Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come for a feast in my log pile house. Oh, it's wonderfully good of you, snake, but no, I'm having a feast with a Gruffalo. A Gruffalo? What's a Gruffalo? A Gruffalo? Why, didn't you know? His eyes are orange and his tongue is black and he has purple prickles all over his back. Oh, where are you meeting him? Oh, here by this lake. And his favorite food is scrambled snake. Scrambled snake? It's time I hid. Goodbye, little mouse. And away snake slid. Silly old snake. Doesn't he know there's no such thing as a Gruffalo? I'll show you this one here. But who is this creature with terrible claws and terrible teeth in his terrible jaws? He's got knobbly knees and turned out toes and a poisonous wart at the end of his nose. His eyes are orange, his tongue is black, and he's got purple prickles all over his back. Oh, help. Oh, no. It's a Gruffalo. My favorite food, the Gruffalo said. You'll taste good on a slice of bread. Good, said the mouse. Don't call me good. I'm the scariest creature in this wood. Just walk behind me, and soon you'll see everyone here is afraid of me. All right, said the Gruffalo, bursting with laughter. You go ahead, and I'll follow after. They walked and walked till the Gruffalo said, oh, I hear a hiss in the leaves ahead. It's Snake, said the Mouse. Why, Snake, hello. And Snake took one look at the Gruffalo. Oh, crumbs, he said. Goodbye, little mouse. And off he slid to his log pile house. You see, said the Mouse, I told you so. Ooh, amazing, said the Gruffalo. They walked some more till the Gruffalo said, I hear a hoot in the trees ahead. It's Owl, said Mouse. Why, Owl, hello. But Owl took one look at the Gruffalo. Oh dear, he said, goodbye, little mouse. And off he flew to his treetop house. You see, said the Mouse, I told you so. Astounding, said the Gruffalo. They walked some more till the Gruffalo said, I can hear feet on the path ahead. It's Fox, said the Mouse. Why, Fox, hello. Fox took one look at the Gruffalo. Oh, help, he said. Goodbye, little mouse. And off he ran to his underground house. Well, Gruffalo, said the Mouse, you see, everyone here is afraid of me. And now my tummy is beginning to rumble. And my favorite food is Gruffalo crumble. Gruffalo crumble, the Gruffalo said, and as quick as the wind, he turned and fled. All was quiet in the deep, dark wood. The Mouse found a nut, and the nut was good. The end.
That is wonderful. And I'm not good at all at military tricks. But I think students and adjuncts of military academies should be taught
the Gruffalo
this trick.
Well,
the Gruffalo.
I thought as well that, I mean, you know, that during Corona, a lot of students were suffering, you know, and I felt, well, they're not very resilient, you know. And the Mouse teaches you to be resilient, quick thinking, think on your feet. You've got some dangerous situation in front of you. What do you do and why do you do it? You have to, it's really using your, you know, your cognitive central processing, your rational mind to get out of this situation.
Wonderful. You should outwit your enemy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Probably there is one more thing which we should pay attention to. It's that we shouldn't believe everything we hear. So
Absolutely.
We should check, and not everything which we see is in reality like we preserve it or perceive it.
Absolutely.
Good point. That's a very good point. It's a very good point. And thank you for the messages coming in on the chat. Thank you. I think I've got maybe 5 more minutes, and then I've got to take my daughter cycling.
Yeah, wonderful. And any questions? Probably there are some questions.
A question just rising after you read your after reciting. Can you hear me? Because thank you, Michael, for reciting and certainly involving us into the pleasures of stylistic analysis of this fairy tale. I say it's a fairy tale. But I had a question. Did you pay attention to reaction of your kids while reading? Did you study the recipient of the story? Did you study questions which they asked you while you were reading different passages? I mean, it is kind of another aspect to dwell into the subliminal effect, the influence that another benefit that fairy tale can have upon a kid. Did you make some conclusions watching, observing the reaction of your children?
You make some excellent observations there. I must admit, no, I didn't. You know, I was so much in the throes of enjoying reading it as a father. However, I do know of the study, and it was done by psychologists where children were being read to aloud, and then they got up and they moved to the rhythm of the story. So it wasn't a linguistic analysis, it was more a behavioral and movement science analysis, and it showed the children getting up and stomping around to the rhythm of the text while they were being read to. You know, these kids were 4, you know, so it does seem to trigger a movement in some children.
But they're also supposed to trigger a number of questions, you know, good, evil.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. And the thing I like about this, the thing I like about this story as well is a lot of children's stories these days have happy endings. This has an happy end, it does, but the Gruffalo and the mouse, they remain enemies. You know, there's no reconciliation. They're still very wary of each other, and that's very realistic in a way. And I think that's also good for children to hear that message, as well as being terrified by the Gruffalo, also to see that they can overcome those problems, but that the enemy, as it were, is still there, and it's okay that there's no resolution at the end. You know, kind of we can get on, we can move on, we can keep going.
All this is part of the moment, I would say. Just many facets of the moment.
It is.
And can I ask one more question? So there is the second part. There is the second part of the book, like the child of Gruffalo. I don't know how it's called in English.
Oh, the Gruffalo's child.
Ukrainian, yeah, because in Ukrainian, Grufalatko. So have you read it to your children?
I have. And the plot there is also very complex, because what happens is, at the end of the first book, the Gruffalos run away. And the second book starts in the cave of the Gruffalo. And the Gruffalo has a little child, a daughter. And the Gruffalo tells the tales of this scary mouse. He calls it the big bad mouse. And the little girl's very inquisitive, and she wants to find out who it is. So the little girl goes out into the world, into the forest, the little girl Gruffalo. And she meets these 3 predators again, the fox and the owl, and they try to eat her, but she's too big. And then all of a sudden she meets the mouse, and she thinks, are you the big bad mouse? I'm going to eat you. But the mouse again is very clever. And what he does, he stands on a tree just as the full moon is coming up, and it casts a huge shadow. So it looks like the mouse is like a giant, and the little Gruffalo child screams and runs all the way back to her father. And the mouse follows her, you know, and at the end, the Gruffalo is very scared and is not going to bother her father again or go out and look for that big bad mouse again. So again, it shows the nimbleness of the cleverness of the mouse and how it can think in a situation to stop itself being eaten. But again, it's a very complex, you know, plot to take it on that way. Thanks, Diana, for mentioning that.
And are there any third and fourth part?
Sorry?
Any sequels?
No, just those two. She left it there.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I have a bunch of them. So actually, you've mentioned that it is connected with music, with rhythm. So can we sing this rhyme, if we can say like this, to children?
Well,
and do native speakers sing, or they just read like you were reading?
Well,
or
I don't sing it, but it wouldn't surprise me if Julia Donaldson herself, being a busker and a singer, actually has a version of this that she sings. Like I say, her first story was a song that verbatim became the story. And that was only 6 years earlier. So it wouldn't surprise me if she does sing it. I haven't heard her sing it, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. What I'm going to talk about, and this is kind of closing the session now, what I'm going to talk about in my next lecture is the language of Julia Donaldson, and looking more broadly at children's literature. So we can look across her oeuvre to see what she's been doing, and the kinds of linguistic and both in lexis and syntax, the kind of things she likes, and her abundant creativity. She's hugely creative and funny as well. So that's what I'm going to talk about next time. So we're kind of zooming out. So we started with the Gruffalo, we'll zoom out to Julia Donaldson, and then we'll zoom out again to children's literature and look at reading processes, and then look at adult reading processes as well. So
and mind that all this zooming in and zooming out is in Zoom.
Exactly. It is.
Next time it will be on the 19th, just a reminder.
Yeah, we'll just send you out the reminders, but yeah.
Same time, same place. Hey, I'm in total awe of you guys and what you're experiencing. I mean, it's completely incomprehensible for me to try and imagine what kind of situation you're in. You know, hang on in there. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and there is, you know, we're living in anticipation of joy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, everybody, have a good evening. See you all in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
And just a reminder to everybody that the video will be posted on the website of our department as well as a YouTube channel, and I will post the link so you can spread over. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And
thank you for all your comments in chat as well, everybody. Yes. I've read them all. Thank you.
Thank you.